States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Bill Lambert.
Jose Gutierrez Jr.
Greg Coladonata.
Steve Nelson.
Ellen Wheeler, let the record reflect that all five trustees are present. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, it's been moved and moved by who did it? Lambert and
Lambert.
Gutierrez. Been moved by trustee Lambert, seconded by Gutierrez. Trustee Gutierrez, that we approve the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Move on to consent. I didn't even see this.
Is that just a placeholder for something that's not happening?
Yeah, I don't see, there's an item under consent, but we don't have any information about it, so we.
So I think it
it's
might
a
have been
placeholder.
What if we
put
wait
there as a
until
placeholder.
Yeah,
Superintendent Rudolph comes back and we find
yeah,
out?
I recollect this now, that, okay, so unless Dr. Rudolph tells us more about this when he comes back, I'm gonna move on to community comments. This is the time reserved for community members to address items that are not on the board, not on the agenda. No, we do have one member of the community who is here, and this person declines to speak. Okay, so we will move on to item 4, review and discussion, item A, board self-evaluation. And before we get started, Superintendent Rudolph, there was an item under consent. Has that been deleted?
Personnel report or personnel? Personnel report.
I think we're good on that one.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to item 4A, board self-evaluation. And we have a professional facilitator with us today, Bill Attia. And Bill, do you have your microphone on? And we'll allow you to, so
Oh, it is a little green light on top.
Well, thank you. As Ellen mentioned, what we're going to do today is talk about self-evaluation, self-assessment. I really prefer to call it self-assessment than self-evaluation. And that's because generally you evaluate others. You could evaluate yourself, but generally evaluation has a supervisory connotation. Self-assessment for a board is not a supervisory responsibility. It's a responsibility to strive towards excellence. Now, no organization is perfect, but every organization should strive to improve. And basically that's what self-evaluation is, or self-assessment. And if you want to call it self-evaluation, self-analysis, different people use different titles. I really don't get hung up on titles. Basically, what we really would like to do today is talk about how your school board can become a better school board on a continuing basis in order to achieve the 5 strategic goals you have there. The primary one being making sure that you do what's right for kids. And so, so that's really what the purpose is today. There is no ulterior agenda. We're not going to have a lot of discussion, but we do want discussion because discussion causes results to happen. But what we really want to do today is talk about why assess, why self-assess, how you can do it, talk about developing an instrument to do it so that you're all on the same page, and agree that the primary purpose is to become a better board. One of the things I thought I might do is just review the agenda very quickly and do that from the perspective that we all have the same understanding what the definition of the terms are. Does everybody have a copy of the agenda? Because we do some extras. If anybody
Yeah,
needs
This one.
We're all set.
Yeah, this one.
that's one, right.
Which one?
The one that Bill made, not the one that
Oh, yeah,
Kathy
right,
Lilman
right.
made.
One that I emailed you, right. As I said, the first thing, self-assessment, it's to look at what I'm doing and what we're doing collectively as a board in order to become a better board and become a better board. After we talk about self-assessment in a little more detail so that you'll know what we're probably going to try to accomplish today. We're going to look at a video clip. I asked AMD to pick a board meeting that you might have, one that might identify certain areas that you might want to improve in. And I thought we'd just look at it and then spend a little time assessing it. I thought I'll take the prerogative and point out some of the things that I saw were positive behaviors that would contribute to board cohesiveness and forward movement, and also identify areas where I think that there are distractors to effective boardsmanship. So those are going to be my observations. Now, in all my observations, there's no, I'm not saying things are right or wrong, but I'm going to share with you from my working with close to 600 school boards now, what the more successful boards do in order to be successful for kids, and what the detractors are that prevent boards from being successful for kids. So that's going to be the purpose of the video clip. Then we want to talk a little bit about roadblocks. And what is a roadblock? A roadblock is the behavior of the board as a board, or of individuals on the board, that any one of you feel contributes to your less well functioning. And I don't want to say dysfunction, because any board that gets something done generally can't call it dysfunctional, but you can call it not functioning as well as you should. And that's what a roadblock is. What is happening at our meetings? What needs to be addressed if we want to become a better board? And then after that, we want to talk about protocols. And protocols are behavior standards that you as a board would like to have in order to start addressing your roadblocks. This is a powerful approach. Ellen and I were briefly talking when Andy had us standing in the cold freezing and cold wind. No, but it's very similar to a process that Palo Alto used and a number of other boards have used in identifying where our strengths are, where we can improve, and how to improve. And then we want to talk about an instrument for self-assessment. And my goal for this workshop, after talking to Allende, and the workshop was developed on the basis of my last workshop with you and discussions with Allende, that when I leave today, hopefully I will have the input to develop a draft self-assessment instrument that'll come back to the board for you to look at and revise and ultimately use by the end of the school year. Yes.
I had a question about instruments, particularly since it's talking about the relationship to the superintendent evaluation. I didn't exactly track, Rudy, where that evaluation, the basic evaluation form you used for your evaluation came from. I mean, it came from Illinois, but I don't remember if it came from this consulting group.
Are you using the one that I gave you a format for? I'm not sure.
Yes.
That was the one that the board
Oh,
asked for.
Oh, the last workshop.
We,
yes.
yeah, okay.
Yes.
I meant the superintendent evaluation
That's right.
form.
The
right?
last workshop.
Okay,
We
so
give you a
those
sample.
ones are, okay, good.
Right.
Lots of good things come out of Illinois, including Abraham Lincoln.
That's right.
And Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton.
That's right. That's right. You're right.
I'm only going to praise dead
Object
politicians
to that
right now.
list.
And then at the end, we're just going to ask if there's any other input any of you have. And we do have an evaluation because I'd like to get your input as to how well you felt the workshop went today in relation to accomplishing our objectives. So that's what we hope to accomplish today. Not going to walk out of here with an instrument, but going to walk out of here with all the ingredients for me to put together an instrument that is unique for your district that you can use later on this year. Yes, Greg.
So is this not a board self-assessment then? This
Today?
is prep for one.
Today is a prep for one.
Okay.
Yeah, we are not doing an assessment of the board because that's going to be yours. And when we get into that, I'm going to recommend that process and a procedure whereby it gives all 5 of you and the superintendent, and if you want others to be engaged, depending on the board. Some boards just like it to be the board members and the superintendent. Some boards don't have the superintendent provide input. Some boards like to have the entire cabinet. Other boards identify people that are regular board attendees and have them do the evaluation. So that's your prerogative. You may want to start on a smaller scale. You may want to go the whole shot. That's up to you. We'll talk about the pros and cons of all of those when we get there. Okay?
Okay, point out one thing. We have a board bylaw for board self-evaluation. Should we be thinking, we don't have a printout, I have it on my laptop now.
Sure.
Should we be thinking about revising this to be consistent with what we're going to learn from you today?
I would hope that what you would do is revise whatever protocols or bylaws or policies you have as you move along, not just today, but whenever there's something that you feel will improve your operations, revise the policy. Policy should never be written in concrete. It should be fluid. It should be adhered to. And I don't like policies that can't be achieved, and I don't like goals that can't be achieved. I'm just giving you my bias. Now, if a board insists on having one, every child will achieve their maximum. That is impossible. We talked it earlier.
How do you know what the maximum is?
You're going to be a perfect board. There is no perfect board.
So you
I'm gonna
didn't
be a
like No
perfect
Child Left Behind?
Well,
I'm just
no, it's
Right.
impossible
Right.
to leave no child behind.
Yeah.
If you have more than one child, you'll know that. I mean, for yourself. I don't know how many of you are parents.
Yeah.
I've got 5, and I've got the extremes.
Yes.
And just about anything you want to talk about in my family,
Someone's left behind?
they all were brought up in the same family.
Uh-huh.
They all went to the same
Super
elementary and
achieved or
high
left
school.
behind in some things, right?
So,
Yeah.
okay. So any other questions?
No.
Okay. Well,
I-
let's just. go ahead.
Bill, I want to say I feel much more comfortable now because I wasn't clear what this was going to be and how this was going to be done. But the idea of starting off and preparing and see how it's done, I think that's fine, excellent.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. And this is your meeting. This is going to be your self-assessment. And so I think it's important that we all contribute. Okay, I started off by talking about it, and that is why self-assess? I've worked with boards that have never assessed themselves, and the results show it. And I've worked with boards that annually assess themselves, and the results show it again. I mean, you could, just like everything else, you can take major corporations, companies, businesses, teachers, superintendents. They go from the poorest to the best. And generally speaking, when you talk about school boards, the ones that are up here in the upper quartile generally are boards that recognize that they can always improve regardless how good they are and get into a program of continuous self-improvement. Not just for themselves as a board, but for themselves as a school district. And annually establish realistic, achievable goals, achieve those goals, and have an expectation that once those goals are achieved, they are melded into the school district and look for other areas in which to improve. Now, in a 20-year cycle, are you ever going to come back and do some of the things you did before? Sure you are. Maybe either to improve because of new information. 20 years ago, who had an iPad in their classroom? Yeah,
You could have an Apple one.
Yeah, but that's what I'm getting at is, things have changed. So the important thing is that you want to continuously improve and at the same time, focus on your priorities. And if there's anything that causes most organizations, including businesses, to fail, is that people don't focus on their priorities. They get distracted. They spread themselves too thin. They don't focus on their priorities. And so, and I'm glad Ellen picked up a card. Let me just share with you the cards I gave you. Thank you, Ellen. The white cards are, as we're going along, if you've got a question, but you don't want to interject it at that time because it'll change the thought, jot the question down on the white card. I also was going to start the meeting, and I started it wrongly, asking each of you on white cards to put what you'd like to achieve, but I already told you what we're going to achieve, so we'll
Doesn't
forego,
matter.
we'll forego that exercise. I'm trying to get you out of here by 9 o'clock so I can comply with Greg's request. But Greg,
I'm just kidding about it. We can stay all day.
The blue and the pink cards hold for later because those are going to be used when we get into roadblocks and protocols. And we got more cards if you need them. So but as we're going along, if there's something you want to jot down, either to put in your file when you get back home, or to bring up later, please use those white cards for that purpose. Okay, the need to focus on priorities. And, the ideal priorities to focus on are your goals as a board. Last time we met, we talked about, and I did send you, I believe, role descriptions for boards. I think it's important for a board to decide what is our role, especially the role as it pertains to governance versus management and administration, which is a superintendent and staff role. It's important to have a clear definition of both. Now, does that mean that they never mix and mingle? Impossible. Even in every organization, governance and management at times overlap each other. And as I shared with you the last time I met with you, legislative law in California and Sacramento at times forces the board to do administrative things and forces the administration to do governance things that you might not see in a strict Harvard business management
Case study.
case study or textbook. So we have to understand that. But I think it's important to know what the board perceives to be its priorities. Because if you really don't know what you want to be and what you want to do, how can you assess whether or not you're doing it? Your kids, you might want them to clean the bedroom, but if you never told them that you want them to clean the bedroom, you can't very well ask them to self-assess how well they're cleaning the bedroom. First of all, kids would not know what a clean bedroom is if you didn't share with them what your expectations are. And so, it's all in expectations, and we need expectations for ourselves too. And that's what a role definition is when we encourage you to have role statements. So I think it's your expectations as to who and what you are as a board, who and what the superintendent is as a superintendent working with your board, and then very importantly, what your expectations are for the organization you're governing. And those are governance goals that it's important for you as a board to clearly identify and assess how well you're achieving those governance responsibilities and expectations for yourself. And that's very much akin, and I'll jump a little bit to E of this, to the superintendent's evaluation. Annually as a board, if you really want to continuously improve, you're going to look at your strategic plan and look at the areas that you want to tackle this year on the route of continuous improvement. And you evaluate the superintendent's performance against your expectations for that. Recall I said at last workshop, you got to have clarity in what your expectations are so the superintendent knows what you want to achieve. And he's got to have a plan developed that's going to help him achieve that plan. And those things are governance, clarifying what you expect to achieve, management, the implementation of the expectation with the staff that the superintendent has. So they go hand in hand, but two very distinct operations. Is that, I just want to make sure before I go beyond that there's a correlation between the two, and sometimes the instruments overlap because there's a responsibility that the superintendent has for board success, and there's a responsibility the board has for superintendent success. And so, and that should be reflected. And that's the same true in establishing goals. A board, for instance, that establishes 2 or 3, in some extraordinary situations 4, very significant improvement goals for a year, and then all year long throws additional things on the superintendent's plate so that he and his staff can't attend to those primary goals. It's the board's fault as well as the superintendent's that those goals aren't being achieved. So it's very important they understand the impact of your behavior in expectations. And this ties into the whole thing of listening to constituents and overreacting to small groups and all the rest. A board's role in governance has to be above the fray. What you have to do is almost in looking at it in the perfect world, say, this is what's best for kids generally. Now, when you get into the implementation, it's the superintendent's role with the support of the board to make sure that those different things, every child, no child left behind, every child a success, as many of those are achieved in the superintendent's plan. So when you establish a self-assessment plan, you need to focus on your priorities, and we're going to get into those a lot more specifically when we get down to 7 below after we talk about the other things. The procedures for self-assessment, they vary. The one that I find to be most successful is to either have the board president as the facilitator or have an outside facilitator as a facilitator.
If I do write down a question, when do I get to ask it?
Okay, if does it relate to what we talked about? Okay, I should pause at the end of each section. Ask your question. Go ahead.
Okay,
Related
and I'll
to-
assume the section means, no, I can leave it.
No,
But
no,
when you move on to the next thing, because you're just procedures for, we're at 2C,
2C
right?
right now, right. Does it pertain to 2B or?
No, it pertains to C, but I'll
Okay.
write it down and
Okay,
I
yeah,
just
sure.
want to know
Okay.
when.
Well, what the procedures are, that I find to be most successful is everybody agrees on an self-assessment instrument. You each complete it. It is sent to either the board president or an independent third party. It is compiled. It comes back to the board, and you have a board meeting to discuss the perceptions of the various board members. On the compilation, you don't know who said what, but generally in the discussion, if somebody has strong feelings, it comes out. But you come to the session already knowing the strengths and weaknesses that the board feels relative to the various issues. If you use a facilitator, depending on which facilitator you use, you could seek a facilitator that's going to be totally neutral, or you can bring a facilitator in that has had experience with successful boards and addresses the differences and the issues that you have. So the other procedure that some boards use is come in and collectively talk about their behavior. My experience has been that you get distracted in discussion and you don't get all the major issues down. My experience has been that boards that do it on their own, when they have the time to really think through what you've been successful at and not as successful at, and get that in writing, you've got a script that's going to direct the discussion generally towards your most significant deficiencies and areas. Now, self-assessment, like evaluations, generally tend to look at the negatives rather than the positives. They should identify the positives as well as the negatives. But if you got something positive going on, there's no need to talk about it other than say, good work, keep it up. It's the negatives that you tend to put most of the discussion on because you want to identify protocols and procedures that are going to address the negative behavior that or the negative policies or practices you might have that will improve your operations. So as I said, the procedure could be a self-assessment by individuals, collectively assembled, and all of you have access to that information before you come to a meeting. It could be just coming to a meeting and talking about your perceptions on how well the board operated. It could be filling out your forms and coming to the meeting without having anybody compile them. I mean, there's a variety of ways and there's no one right way. I'm just going to share with you that the one that tends to be most productive and boards prefer is having it compiled and they see how everybody feels without necessarily identifying who feels which way and talk about it. And we'll talk about your preferred procedure later on. What was your question, Steve? What procedure?
Oh, thank you. In the procedures, I like to save money, if you mind. So instead of having necessarily you come and moderate it, what kind of things works? Because in some cases, I feel like we're part of the community. So the issue of whether we're a school board or not, maybe not as important as that we're part of this particular community with the particular city council that we work actually fairly well with, not necessarily person to person, but group to group and organization. So what about using somebody who's like a community moderator?
You could do that.
Like we have a mediation group in the city that does things of, we have a human relations commission on the city that has different kinds of things, using that kind of a person that's already in our community.
Right. The board, I think, needs to determine which is going to be the most effective individual. And if it's a local community person,
So it's more individual. See, when we get an organization, unless we've already worked with that person before, we sort of can't say whether, yeah, okay, anyway,
No,
never
no,
mind.
you could.
That was my
you
basic
could-
question.
You could identify an individual. I mean, when you look at Stanford University, I'm sure that it's close by. I'm sure they've got a lot of people out there
Oh,
that you
okay.
might find to be a successful facilitator. I mean, there's a lot of people. I mean, what you as the five of you need to do is to determine who you feel can guide you as a board to be a better board. And if it's a person that's
Ah,
on your
okay.
Human Relations Council, if it's a person on your city government, if it's a person at Stanford, if it's anybody, you should identify that person. Absolutely.
Okay.
There is no one right person. Every board works.
Hopefully there's lots of good moderators in the
No, that's right. That's right. Yes, Greg.
My preamble, I'd like to ask everyone not to interrupt each other. I noticed while you were answering the question you were asked, you were cut off by an interruption. So I'd like to just encourage everybody to not interrupt people during our meeting today, if possible. But my actual two questions are, when you compile the board feedback and make a document and share with the board, that's a public document, right? So we'd have it printed out for the meeting at which we discuss the self-evaluation.
One of the things that you might want to find out, I'm not quite sure if California legislation permits board self-evaluation to be closed session. Some
No, it
states
doesn't.
do,
It does not,
and
right?
some
Dr.
states
Rudolph?
don't.
The board self-evaluation cannot be a closed item. So it's going to be an open session.
Could be an
And so
open
then
session.
if we, this is an argument maybe for anonymizing the feedback, because if we're going to have to print it out, maybe it'd be a little gentler to not have each pointed criticism, be
Right.
attributed.
Well, as I said, most boards prefer to have somebody assemble the data, compile the data, and return it back to the board
Without names
without.
attached.
That's what most
It
boards.
sounds like it might be better in our instance.
Right.
And what's the best time of year to do the annual assessment?
I would
End
say-
of the year, beginning of the year?
I think your best time of the year is toward the end of the year.
For the end of the year.
Yeah, before you set your goals for the following year. And most boards, they do self-evaluation, usually do it in the May, June framework. Some do it more June, July. But generally, the board self-evaluation precedes the superintendent's evaluation maybe by 2 weeks to a month.
Oh, because if it were after, then part of what the board could evaluate is how well they evaluated the superintendent.
You can do that too, because that generally is one of the parts of the criteria. But generally speaking, it's, I'm going to say it's a timing issue that most boards really like to keep their summers free. And so they try to get the board evaluation out generally in May, while the superintendent's evaluation is generally best done if you wait until July.
July.
So you have the full year's goals process.
Okay, thank you. And these white cards, we don't hand them in or anything, right?
No.
It's just for our use. Okay.
Any other questions up until now? Instrumentation, self-assessment, there's a variety of them, you could buy them. And there's, stock that some consulting firms have, there's some on the internet. I'm sure the California Association of School Boards has a self-evaluation or self-assessment instrument. I find that generally speaking, if boards develop their own and modify it to meet current needs, using the best from CASB and others, and develop your own. But again, the instrumentation should be what you want it to be. A lot of boards simplify it by having a checklist. I don't think a checklist in itself works well, either for a superintendent or a board. I think that some of your more important improvements come from your ability to share instances, experiences, etc., that can be learned from, rather than very good, needs to improve, lousy. So my recommendation would be that you have a evaluation instrument with enough room for board members to share what they look upon to be your strengths and your shortcomings. And we'll get into some of those specifics later on, and I've got samples of instruments that boards have used that we've developed on the basis of what boards have used in the past.
Are you done?
Sure.
Okay. I guess I took, when you said checklist, I immediately agreed because there's a checklist that says, we did this, check, we did this, check, we did that, check, or he did this, or, but I sort of disagree with, because I've seen teacher surveys that we've had over the last, that the teachers union has done. And one of the things that's very useful there, and SurveyMonkey recommends this also in there, is there's checklists sort of like, how do you rate this? And you put some wordage on those. That gives you an idea how people feel. And then, and then there's the issue, if you feel particularly and you want to explain why you feel it, then you write the commentary to go with why you rated this. And I found it useful to say, oh, there's general agreement, like 4 or 5 on this thing. And this one, this part of it, it's, oh, there's a much wider divergence range of answers. And then you read the commentary and you sort of see, oh, this person's, it forces you to, if it's a bunch of words, all words are the same. If it's a 2 out of a 5 ranking and the rest of the group is ranking 4, 3s and 4s and 5s, that says something that you can find by going into the verbiage.
Well, the thing is, and all of us, Steve, interpret what we read from our base of knowledge. And I think all 6 of us around the table can read the same thing and walk away with a slightly different perspective as to what I'm being asked. And that's why I think comments are much more productive than just a check. And I'm just encouraging you when you develop the instrument that you leave enough space so people can express their thoughts.
Oh, yeah.
So is there anything else about what we hope to achieve? Bill?
No.
Jose?
Good.
Greg?
I understand.
Steve? No? I understand we have a video clip.
Bill, I have a quick question.
Oh, sure. Jose.
So E, relationship to superintendent evaluation.
I had mentioned it earlier.
Right.
When Steve brought it up.
Okay.
There should be some relationship. Your self-assessment is for the improvement of the board. Superintendents, and I hope you do a self-assessment of yourself as well as the board in your process, right? You complete the evaluation form and the board completes it, right?
But I didn't give that to them. No, I gave them a progress towards goals because we did it
Okay,
mid-year.
right.
And then.
No, I'm talking about,
You talking about the final one?
I'm talking about your final one.
Yeah, the final one.
Yeah. The final one, we suggested superintendent complete the evaluation. And the board complete an evaluation. And that you, in there we, well, let's just talk a little bit about the superintendent evaluation. Our recommendation is that each of the 5 of you complete it separately. That either the president or a third party compile it, that the board comes together and comes to an agreement. If Bill thinks the superintendent did a lousy job and the other 4 of you think he did a great job, he did a great job. I mean, and there's got to be consensus. Now, the 4 of you may have overlooked something that Bill saw, that when you talk about it, all of you might say, well, gee, maybe he didn't do such a great job, and might lower it. But ultimately, a superintendent can only get 1 evaluation. You can't get 2
Yep.
evaluations. And so
Why-
you've got to come to agreement as to what that evaluation is.
And that's in reference to just the final
It's
evaluation.
final evaluation.
Okay.
Right.
How do you, how does the, we're grappling and Trustee Lambert had a way of handling this, how those differences in perceptions on particular item are actually very useful for maybe the superintendent to understand. Oh, there's 1 or 2 trustees that think in 1 or 2 cases that there's something that's amiss. And maybe the other 3 didn't. I can think of something like,
You don't need to be specific.
no, I'm thinking of MBAs going and looking at budgets in a way that an MBA would look, or a audit, somebody with fiscal auditing background would look at something. It's like that person notices something that nobody else on the board would ever notice. So how do you bring the diversity of in rather than what was it, the air of the average? What was that video?
The myth of the average.
The myth of the average. The myth of the average. If we're going to get away from this, we just take the things and average them.
That's not what he
then-
said. No, but it's got to be
Well,
consensus. If
But the
three people think,
consensus may be that there's a diversity of opinions on how you did on this. And that can be a consensus also.
But
That there is a couple of people that are very sensitive to thinking that
your
you're.
point has been made.
and let me
So
share-
I don't know
yeah,
how-
No, that's very good. Let's say that a minority of the board totally disagrees with the majority. And when you come together, it's what the board feels, which is the majority of the board. Now, if in that discussion, it's a topic that the board says, we understand what you're saying, and the superintendent should be made aware of that, but our overall feeling is that it's this.
Oh, yeah.
It's the board.
Right.
Now, I'm going to share with you what a number of boards have done,
Mhm.
is that they come to a consensus, and that is the formal evaluation. And I'm saying boards that have asked me to facilitate, but they asked me to give the superintendent all the raw data without identifying who said it.
Okay.
That's fine, but that is not part of the evaluation. It's background sort of an appendix for the superintendents. Now, the danger in that, and there is a danger, and I talk with the boards about it, is if there is a board member, which occasionally there is, that is way adrift from the majority of the board, it may give that opinion more prominence than it should give it if the board, if four of you are here and one person is here, putting that one comment down might give it more prominence than the board wants to. That's why it's really the board's decision to decide what should go to the superintendent. Because it's the board that's evaluating it.
Mhm.
It's not Bill, it's not Jose, it's not Greg, it's not Steve, it's the board. But when I facilitate, if there is a minority opinion, that is a significant minority opinion, I encourage boards to put it in there, but making it clear it's a minority opinion. And generally in a side letter, because you never know where evaluations end up. And so,
Wait, do you have problems with confidentiality of evaluations? Because that's one of the really strong things.
Yeah, my evaluation is confidential.
Yeah, I know.
But it wasn't treated confidential this time around, so.
What are you talking about?
but
Dr. Rudolph?
you never know,
He just
you
said
never know
something
when a
that was
court
interesting.
order might require
Oh,
an instrument to be released.
Ah,
And so,
court order.
court order.
Could I ask Dr. Rudolph what he was referring to? We didn't treat your,
He got a copy of one person's evaluation, and he gave it to the assistant superintendent, Rachel.
I emailed mine to Bill because it said so in the document. But so
I did
that was an
not-
error of
I
ours.
did not give it, I didn't give it to anyone. When I got it, I thought that maybe I was going to be helping you evaluate the superintendent today, because I got.
he
it
was
early
not
on.
the facilitator that was
Well,
at
it
the
said it
bottom
in the
of
document. I read the document. I did what it said in it.
No, that's okay.
But
But I did not give that to anyone.
then what's Dr. Rudolph talking about? Did someone else send you there?
No.
So
We have to agree that that's the process that's going to be used for the contract.
Yeah, I think so. And part of the problem is,
It's not an issue. I just want to, since
Right.
you mentioned confidentiality, I'm just trying to say, like,
right,
just like this process, it has to be agreed upon in terms of how the process is. If we use outside facilitator, we use outside facilitator.
right.
If we don't, then
yeah, we
the
don't.
document stays with y'all.
Yeah.
This time, it went to two different people outside of the board.
I think if we look at the minutes of our meeting where we decided that, there is nothing in writing about what we decided. So,
It's still my evaluation.
oh, no, I know, but,
Let's not get- let's not get- let's
oh,
not
wait,
get
because it
scared.
does down explicitly say the board president or a facilitator, or the facilitator.
Yeah, we should be clear about.
And it has
the
Illinois
process.
on it,
It's
so.
not- feedback is feedback. I just want to be clear about it.
That's okay.
I wasn't
Let's
even thinking of that
that's-
happening.
And
It's
one-
not- I don't want to make it a big issue. It isn't.
No, I understand. That's perfect.
And let me just bring one other thing up about self-assessment and evaluation. I hope this board won't, and board shouldn't, make the mistake of saying, we're going to wait until the evaluation or self-assessment before we identify areas that we think are going awry. Evaluation should be a continuing, ongoing process. And if there's something significant that the superintendent is doing that the board feels, and I want to say the board now, not individual board members, the board feels is distracting to the quality of education, there's no reason in the world why an evaluation session can't be held after a board meeting to share that and discuss that with the superintendent. I encourage boards to have quarterly evaluations with superintendents during the first 2 or 3 years, just to start the dialogue. If I'm not mistaken, all of your evaluations are in executive session, closed session in California. Now,
They don't have to be, actually.
but they,
Let's not argue about that.
I know.
No, the superintendent requests that. That's
Yeah,
requested
it may be in his
superintendent.
contract.
Right. Okay. Now, and that's where earlier when you brought up, Greg, I think you brought it up about confidentiality of, really, every time you evaluate the superintendent, you're also evaluating the board. You can't evaluate the superintendent without evaluating the board. You can't assess the board without evaluating the superintendent. Because the 6 of you are entwined so closely in governing and managing the district that his behavior and your behavior have to be noted in almost every evaluation and self-assessment. And so this does give you the privilege of discussing areas of board behavior that impact on the superintendent in closed session. And just about everything you do impacts on him, and just about everything he does affects your success. So there, even though you may not have that specific, and I didn't want to get into this when you raised the question, or Greg raised the question earlier, but and some boards do both evaluations at the same time, the board self-evaluation and the superintendent's evaluation, because they are so interconnected. Personally, I think that the board does a better job when they could focus on their behavior at one time and the superintendent's behavior at another time, rather than cramming it together in the same meeting. So I'm just giving you my bias. Yes, Greg.
In our superintendent evaluation instrument, there were items asking about how well the superintendent interacts with his team and what his how his staff what his staff thinks of him and so forth. Is that in a typical evaluation? Because I don't think some of us might know more than others. I know nothing about the superintendent and cabinet interaction. And if I'm asked to judge it, I don't know, do boards often interview direct reports of the superintendent in order to find out the answers to those questions?
Most boards that have that in there do it from their observation, the types of reports they get from subordinates to the superintendent. The subordinates,
don't interrupt.
You're right.
the subordinates reports at board meetings. And I'm going to share with you if there's any real problem,
We'll find out.
you're going to know about it very quickly, because things aren't going to be getting done, and you're going to just notice it in total operation. And where you're really going to pick it up is during bargaining, where the board or board representatives have direct contact with staff. Bargaining, you're going to learn about staff relations, the quality of material you get, and the reports you get in the operations of the school will be noted. You will notice it, not by going to them directly, but by observing the product, the delivery of the product that you receive from the superintendent through support, or through the superintendent from subordinates.
Okay.
I was wondering, on our district quality report, one of the things it talked about is, you talked about things that were plus, things were negative. And one of the things was, and I wonder how the board could evaluate itself on how well it does this. I'm not sure the mechanism, but I would say the board hadn't realized that evaluations were not being done in the district office for people in their positions. So he was talking about directors. I happened to learn about it because a principal mentioned that he'd been in his position for 3 years and hadn't gotten an evaluation.
Do you have a policy on all staff members being evaluated?
Oh, well, that's one of the questions.
Good question.
Well, no.
How do we, if I can't talk to how does the board evaluate how well it's doing that kind of oversight job?
Well,
However it does it.
okay.
It's like, well, nobody told me. I sat here and I have my email. And so how does the board evaluate whether it's doing enough proactively to monitor things like that? Because that was a
Kind of
major
shocking.
thing. And
It was
that
kinda
was
shocking.
It was shocking
Yeah.
to me.
Number one, and again, I don't know what your structure is, but I presume the superintendent is responsible for the direct, do the principals report directly to you? So he's responsible. I would presume in your standard operating procedure that in at least one of your executive sessions a year, you're going to ask the superintendent for an overview of the performance of the staff that report to him. And in that, and generally that is done at times when he recommends salary increases for staff. And I'm not sure,
How does,
my experience is it's just a one paragraph
Per person.
per person, very brief, these are.
oh, okay. I need to get that in my head because it's something that hasn't happened in this organization.
So
And it's skipped out of oversight. And I think it's reflects on the board's ability to oversight that it missed that for a decade.
so could I ask
Or 5 years.
trustees that have been on the board longer than me?
Let me
Okay.
come back and a major overriding concept you have to have as a board is, as a board, your job is not to run the district,
Right.
to make sure that it is being run well.
Absolutely.
And generally speaking, if things aren't being done of that nature, they're going to become evident when you find a principal or a teacher who is not performing adequately and going in. Let me give you an example, and this is a real live example. I was called in, and as I think I shared with you earlier, I'm usually called in more for divorces between boards and superintendents than for marriages. And this one I was called in, and I tried to find out. I met with the board. They says, this guy has not been evaluating his staff. And he said, we ran into a problem with a principal, and we found out he hasn't been evaluating for the last 3 years.
Uh-huh.
And right along, we've always heard that, he met with the staff and was very friendly with them, but really never evaluated them. And so I asked the board, I said, well, when you evaluate the superintendent, didn't you bring that up with them?
So
There was
what evaluation of the superintendent?
And I said, and there was a pause. Well, we never evaluated our superintendent. Now, they've had the superintendent for 8 years. They never evaluated him. I'm going to say the most powerful thing is example. And if you don't think it's important to evaluate your superintendent, his or her immediate impression is, if they don't think it's important for me to be evaluated, they're not thinking it's important that I need to evaluate. Boards that do self-assessment, and that's one of the side effects of self-assessment, where it starts right at the top, and evaluate their superintendent well. And I think it's legitimate in going through the evaluation process. Rudy, I understand. We assume you evaluated all your principals according to your policy, and the reason why I said every year, I don't know. I mean, I know some school districts that require formal evaluation every 2 or 3 years once a person's on tenure, or if you don't have tenure, then it's more every year. But in California, do administrators achieve tenure? Or do you keep tenure in your teaching
No.
position and not? So your administrators aren't strict contract in California. Laws change. That's how it used to be, and same thing in Illinois. But sometimes it's every other year, sometimes it's every year. Personally, I think the best policy is to evaluate every year. Every person in the organization, every year, and that's on file, and that it's on the basis of improvement, with the full understanding that supervision is not for the purpose of getting you. Supervision is a process where you're going to become a better person through the supervisory process. And 99% of supervision should be to improve the individual to do a better job where he or she is. Only 1% in making sure that a poor individual does not continue in the organization. Unfortunately, too many people look upon evaluation the other way around. 99% purpose of the evaluation is to get rid of that wood. 1% is to improve performance. No, it should be the other way around. So anyways, but we can talk about that again. Now, it is impossible for a board to be able to know the day-to-day operations of everything, whether it's evaluation or anything else. But generally speaking, if evaluations are not being done, you're going to be finding that principals are not going to be focusing on board priorities. And superintendent should be responsible for that. If your principals are not focusing on priorities you established as a board, I think we went over that pyramid where the board establishes the goals, or you can do it as a base. And then all the way up to the superintendent, everybody should be working on that. That is responsible for achieving improvement in reading. Superintendent's responsible, the assistant superintendent for curriculum, every principal and every teacher that teaches reading has got to be held accountable in the evaluation process for improvement of reading as to how you want it to be improved. So all of those, and there should be evidence in everyone's evaluation that they've been evaluated. And you can't do that unless you evaluate on a regular basis. So to be specific, no, you don't interview principals and say, were you evaluated or how do you like it? You get that from your sense of the operation of the organization. If an organization is operating extremely well, you could pretty much assume that that is being happening. If you're getting a lot of gripes, if you're getting feedback, believe me, if people are unhappy, all 5 of you are going to hear about it one way or another. Okay?
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions regarding that?
I have one comment. I think it's much more valuable to have someone like you come and help us with issues like this rather than just hire someone in our community who hosts meetings, because you have a lot of domain experience that we don't otherwise have in our community readily available. So I don't know what it costs to hire you, but I know that it's worth it. So I'm glad you came out to help us with this.
Thank you.
I guess my worry on that a little bit is the,
You don't have to rebut my point.
no, is the giving the fish and the fisherman, teaching somebody to fish issue. Because if this organization isn't able to understand what it needs and how to do stuff, and we have to bring you in every time we do a self-evaluation.
Not necessarily every time,
Oh.
but right now the boat's taking on water.
That's true.
Okay.
That's true.
Fishing is something to be
I
great.
guess, yeah, you're the guy that's teaching us how to fish. Okay, thank you very
First, the
much.
boat has to stay afloat.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's go to the video clip. How are you presenting it? Do you have it's going to be up here?
You changed
Yeah,
it.
so I'll present it up here, but,
You want to take a break first for 5 minutes? Or?
No.
Okay.
so it's just a question of which one we want to do. I think, I went to the 4th of February, which sort of was good, but it may not be the one that you want to use. You may want to use a different one.
I would let you pick.
Let's
I
use.
mean, I didn't want to, I tried to find one that was sort of middle of the road, wasn't our greatest moment, wasn't our worst moment, right? So,
As
that's
long
the
as it
one, we
has
just
some
go for it.
great moments in it and some bad moments in it.
Let's see what you got. We can look at more
In
than
your
one.
opinion.
We can look at more than one if needed.
they all have great moments. This is February 4th, just to recap what we did. I pulled up this is the one we were talking about Measure G. So there was a little discussion around there about that whole notion of how we're going to use Measure G, whether or not to use a cap, sort of that one.
But once the students are accepted, then they're accepted.
This is also the one when we did summer school. So we can either choose to watch the portion about summer school, we can choose to watch the portion about Measure G.
How long are they?
The Measure G one's actually a little bit shorter. It's around 20-something odd minutes. It went a little bit over, but the meat of it was probably about 20.
I actually would prefer to do the summer school
Summer school?
How long
because
is
we
that one?
have been spending too much time on facilities.
I heard that before.
And Measure G.
And of course, this area of research.
At least that's what I would prefer.
20-minute video
Being
seems
certain
long.
schools, but actually what happens is
I'm not gonna watch the whole thing.
Oh.
10 minutes is really long.
the STK staff works with our enrollment. And doing, all of
I wonder who's gonna get that. Who's gonna
it being
show
certain
forward.
schools, but actually what happened,
I'm trying to remember the moment where she stops talking and it becomes a conversation. The LCAP,
I hope you will be.
One One's for protocols
being
and one's for something else.
simultaneously, and I'm not going to go down the line or anything. I'll just ask. Yeah, excuse me. trustee
Excuse
Moses.
me,
That was good. Let's
Yeah.
watch that.
notify them right away.
So just-
We
just
really
so we
haven't had a
realize
wait
it.
list. The only program we had a wait list for was
All right,
Valdez.
there we go.
Here's our attendance. You can see that when the kids enroll, they stay. So once we get them, they stay through the end of the program. So, we're successful, like I said. Once we enroll children, they stay in our program. They're not leaving, which is great. Our teachers appreciate the 2-teacher assistant model with time for professional development. And the majority of the programs, even with the nonprofits that we contract with, have a teacher and usually have a classroom assistant. So having that extra support in the classroom has been a real positive. And what we noticed as we have been doing, all of our programs have pre-test, post-test data so we can see how our kids have done. All of our students tend to show growth from beginning to end of the summer program, more so in math than in our literacy program. Unfortunately, however, the challenge is that as we track kids then into the school year, the results don't hold. Our results are really mixed. So even while Valdez is designed to bring kids up, they're not all staying up. So it's not a perfect system. We have difficulty retaining teachers, hiring teachers, and having teachers work in the summer. It's not easy. Enrolling students, we've had more space than we've been able to have students, and I think that's why we're trying to work with the challenge team on the summer learning loss group to try to figure out a way that we can get more kids involved in our programs. And then just clearly, it's not a huge expense, but we're only supporting about 10% of our students. So we're in process of working for next summer already, getting ready to put out postings to hire teachers and begin student recruitment. So this will be an ongoing process as we go through the rest of the spring to make sure that we're ready to go in June.
Okay, so I'm going to ask for clarifying questions and comments from the board simultaneously. And I'm not going to go down the line or anything. I'll just ask. Yeah, excuse me. trustee
Excuse me, I would like to challenge that rule because I think this is an extremely important item, the issue of curriculum in summer and makeup. And I feel very shortchanged as a board member who studied this when you try to conglomerate it and say everything is in 1 minute, both
I didn't
questions
say
and comments.
anything about a time. I said we would do questions and comments at the same time.
Oh, is that all you said? Okay.
Yes.
You didn't let her finish her sentence before you argued with her.
Excuse me.
I'm just telling you what happened. You can check the video.
I'll check the video, but you can tell me that
Okay,
also.
so what I said is
could you
I'm
back
not going
that
to
up,
go down
please?
the line. I'm just going to ask
See if she
trustees who-
stopped talking before I started talking, because this is an issue of protocol.
Many of the programs, even with the nonprofits, mixed.
comments from the board simultaneously, and I'm not going to go down the line or anything. I'll just ask. Yeah, excuse me. trustee
Excuse me, I would like to challenge that rule because I think this is an extremely,
Comments at the same time.
oh, is that all you said? Okay.
Yes.
You didn't let her finish her sentence before you argued with her.
Excuse me.
I'm just telling you what happened. You can check the video.
I'll check the video, but you can tell me that
Okay,
also.
so what I said is I'm not going to go down the line. I'm just going to ask trustees who have a question or a comment to raise their hands, and I will make sure that everyone gets a turn to speak. We will have community comments afterwards. Trustee Gutierrez, your hand was up.
Thank you. Fellow board members, thank you. I've got a couple questions. I'm intrigued about two things, Valdez and then also STK. With STK, is that centered mostly around a certain group of schools, or do you see that the majority of parents that do bring their children to participate are from a certain area of the city, or is it just spread out?
Well, it ends up being certain schools, but actually what happens is the STK staff works with our enrollment staff. So they actually extract the data from registration, and they find all the the families that have indicated their students have not had preschool, and then they work to invite all of them to come. So they actually work with our enrollment, but we tend to have a majority of our kids from Castro, Therakoff, and
Okay.
Monte Loma.
And then with Valdez, I'm just thinking out loud, but one of the questions I have was, I'm thinking that one of the reasons, and they might know this, I'm not sure, right,
Mhm.
at Stanford, but I'm thinking that one of the reasons why perhaps the level isn't sustainable after they come back is because when you're looking at that targeted group, there's still the issue of language,
Mhm.
right, and language development. So based on that, their understanding of the current concept for math when they come back, if they're struggling with the language part of it, I can see why they may not be able to sustain it.
And that
So-
definitely could be the case.
So I'm wondering if have we posed that question to them or have we observed something?
We have not, so that will be something that we can ask them. This will be our second year moving forward, so that will be something we could talk to them about. That's a good point.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Trustee Nelson?
Yeah, I wonder if you're familiar with, I sent it to Rudy and FYI, the board, the RAND Foundation study on summer schools that was published, I think, in November of 14
No.
about, and funded by the Wallace Foundation.
I'm not.
I hope you will become familiar with that because it looked at a dozen. You remember how many it is, Rudy? Top in the
Top of my
dozen,
head.
but at least 10 large-scale urban efforts to try to do summer learning gap stuff. And what they found is there was no statistically significant difference long-term in the English programs. Mr. Jose, I'm a little bit surprised at that. They did find that the best ones in math did continue on, there was long-term gains, statistically significant, but only if those programs went at least 6 weeks. Okay, they had to be at least 6 weeks long, which I think the Valdez one is, right, 7 weeks? And I think it's 6, you'll have to look at it. And they were shown to be very, intensive in that they were focusing on what the problem was. So if you haven't read that, I think there's a new one that's been updated. And of course, this area of research keeps on changing. But I will be inquiring of my staff at the district office what outside our own little area research they're depending on. And how do you measure that?
Measure what?
The issue of long-term, whether it stays with them or not. It says we are successful once they come, they stay. That's just in terms of attendance.
That was just attendance.
Okay. So that's the only thing we measure success of?
No,
Because I heard that
She said
being
pre-
used at least 3 times in the different programs. Like the A-Learn Math, our most successful program, and then we are successful once they come, they stay. So I wonder,
we have data. So all of the outside nonprofits give us pre and post data. We in our own program do pre and post data. Then we take all of the kids and we actually pull their progress at trimester data. We look at their
Right.
benchmarks, we look at their grades.
right, okay.
So that's how we do it.
Okay, because I believe you guys. I believe the post once they're in school number.
Mhm.
I never believe vendors at the beginning of 6 weeks and the end of 6 weeks. Did you learn anything that we've been teaching you for 6 weeks? I mean, that isn't success, right? I hope we don't measure success that way.
We look at it all. We look at everything.
I understand, but I hope we don't measure success by the vendors telling us after.
That's why we pull grades. That's why we look at benchmark assessments. That's why
Right.
we
But
pull
our
all that data.
benchmarks are whether this group of 30 at the Common Core, I don't know. I don't know whether the RAND Corporation study looked at Common Core because it was before that was really implemented. But that would be an issue of whether their newest version of that does.
So any more questions or comments, Trustee Nelson?
No,
Okay, Trustee Caldonado?
Ms. Bauer?
Yes.
What would be involved if we decided we wanted to expand our footprint at Valdez or STK or A-Learn, what's like, is it possible? Is it just a matter of committing more budget money or other things, other constraints?
If we wanted to expand to with our nonprofits, like the groups like Valdez, STK, yes, it would be conversations with them. It would be a contribution, monetary contribution. What's their capacity to support our district?
Some of them might say, we can't get any bigger. Others might say, oh, if you give us this much per head, we can do it.
Exactly. It would have to be an individual conversation.
Okay.
I know that like for A-Learn and for Elevate, we're actually expanding for the summer.
They are expanding.
We are.
We are expanding
We are
our-
going to offer, we're going to expand the number of classes we offer.
Okay, good. When in the budget cycle is the right time for, if the board has direction to give, like, let's have 120 seats at Valdez and try to fill them, you know, like, when does that come up? Because I don't want to miss that day because I want to give
This
that
is the
direction.
day. Direction to the board can happen at any time when there's this direction to the staff can happen at any time. Because we're not actually voting on a
That's
budget.
what you think,
Well,
but I
well,
want
I
to know what they think.
I think our issue is that we don't have a strategic plan that outlines what our priorities are. And so if we just to make a decision that we're going to focus on summer school, we can. The problem is that it may come at a cost to other things. And so what I would say is that as we work on the strategic plan as well as the LCAP, we put that in, and as the LCAP, the budget, not for this year, but for next year, will actually be determined as we go through, and that's when you would approve it. And so that would be a good time as if we set that as a priority to say summer school is something that we view as important. Therefore, we want to put money there.
We were told that this was the time to do it before, why the planning for summer school was going on. And I understand it isn't in the strategic plan, but the strategic plan does not exist. And these children are still not meeting
To bring it back a little bit.
standard.
So,
Bring it back to the kids.
right. And so if in our strategic plan and LCAP this year, in the next 4 months, decided Valdez, is it Valdez or Valdez?
Valdez.
Valdez and SDK and A-Learn sound like, despite some stickiness of the knowledge problems, sound like good experiences for our students. We could put that into the budget we approve in June, and that would take effect in the summer of 20.
I'm gonna fast forward to one other part, which is, because this is more us district or you and district. At the end of the meeting, it's really you all interacting with each other when you're talking about items for future discussion.
Good,
Bill sees that interaction also.
right. By the way, the leadership of the board sat on that for about 4 months discussing summer school before it was agendized, and let me put it, the district leadership.
What is the point that you make by bringing up that statement?
It's protocol, how our protocol works, how our bylaws that say stuff gets on the agenda works.
And the rigor of Thank you. Now the other one about
Right. So the second one is,
properties and leases.
right. So there was a request for closed.
for Board meeting, so
boy. Me too.
it sounds like 3 of us are interested in
Four.
that.
I'm interested in facilitate,
Yep.
example.
We had the CSBA one, I guess,
Let's follow,
a while ago, but
I'd say we could follow that.
I'm just looking for guidance, I guess, in terms of this
Yeah,
topic.
hold on a second.
Sorry.
Before I call on trustee Lambert, I would like to offer a different opinion of the interpretation of that DQR, that the DQR did not talk about, criticize the last 2 presidents of the board, Stephen.
It said board
I think-
leadership.
So-
You can interpret that several different ways.
And I interpret it my own way.
Right.
You interpreted it a different way.
Right.
So anyway, trustee Lambert?
Yes, I'd like to also have a a board evaluation. I would recommend, however, that we have a facilitator come in and guide us through the process.
Oh, yeah, with a gavel. They can get people
A
to stop
big
talking
gavel.
if necessary. Yeah. Good
Okay,
idea.
Trustee Nelson.
Excellent idea.
So a special meeting or during a meeting?
It could,
I'm asking trustee Lambert.
A special meeting would not be out of the question, considering we have very full schedules coming up, at these meetings. And I think it'd be difficult to fit in. I'm not, jumping at the gun to have a special meeting, but if we can fit it in, that would be great.
the California
So,
School Board,
excuse me, trustee Nelson, this is, I'm not going to finish my comment. Trustee Gutierrez.
Yeah, right. I'm all for it. I thought we spoke about this at the retreat. I thought there was some sort of approach that was brought to us about the evaluation process. So I remember what you had touched upon on that note. If CSBA has a guideline for how to do this as well, though, I'm open for that too. I think the important thing is that we just make it happen. Outside of that, special session works for me on a Saturday, if possible. If we can fit it in during the regular scheduled meetings, I'm game for that too.
And I'll say if people are interested in a facilitated meeting like this, I would much rather do it on a Saturday than try to fit it in, into a
very
regular
meta.
board meeting. So
Watching a meeting about
it sounds like
this
the
meeting.
three of us are interested in that.
I'm interested in facilitate. What I would recommend, because one of the things I've seen many times when I've gone down to the CSBA things is the CSBA has board governance
Consultants.
consultants. And I'm sure there must be one up in the Bay Area, several up here in the Bay Area. We don't necessarily have to.
Unless you need more.
No, I think it made an interesting question between what upsets me sometimes, but sometimes works, is this issue of dialogue and the issue of parliamentary procedure. I was whispering to the president that I wish she would notice how many times she gave herself the floor. And the issue of if we're operating on a dialogue, it has to be something that's less contentious. But as soon as the president puts herself above other members of who gets to come next in the sequence of talking, I think you're violating the idea of the chair being a neutral person in a parliamentary procedure.
I'd like to ask a question of Nelson, Trustee Nelson. So when did Trustee Wheeler play favorites like you're talking about?
With herself?
But
When
what-
she said, it's going to be Bill Lambert's thing, but I want to say something and define something. The president doesn't get to define what the world is.
Wait. So,
Back it
so
up.
Bill was talking, and then
It was,
you started, or
no, Jose was talking, it was Mr. Lampert's time, and then Ellen said, well, I want to, before Mr. Lampert starts, I want to put in this comment. It's like, either the circle is
what was the comment that she made? Do you remember?
that board leadership doesn't mean president. And I disagree with Mr. Nelson's interpretation of
But she
board
waited
leader.
her turn, right? Like other
No,
people
that wasn't-
finished, and then she said, "I'd like to take issue with what Trustee Nelson said," right? She didn't say, "Nobody else talk.
Actually,
I get
she
to say
did.
what I want."
No. She said, before Mr. Lampert starts, I want to put in this comment.
And so are you
That's a
saying that the
precedence.
president should never?
That's a precedence issue. Yeah, a president should never give themselves precedent to make a comment unless it has something to do with the order of how the parliamentary procedure is going to.
Let me ask you this. How important is that rule to you? Is it of the utmost importance? Is it of medium importance? No, it doesn't say in there.
Doesn't make a darn bit of difference, Greg.
No.
But if you want to, if the issue is, how does the public view this interaction in an official public meeting of a publicly elected board? the fact that we have no parliamentary procedure.
You're changing the topic.
No, a part of it is we have no parliamentary procedure. The President Wheeler and President Lampert were unwilling to adopt any written parliamentary procedure.
But you do have a
And
parliamentary
so-
procedure. If I'm not mistaken, your policy does say that you follow Robert's rules.
No, it doesn't.
Did-
It absolutely
believe
does
that it-
not. Nowhere does it say that. The-
Don't raise your voice.
Well,
Don't
I
raise your
want to
voice.
make it very clear
You can do it
that
with a normal voice.
that's wrong.
So you don't have any guidelines and,
No.
okay. Well, I'm gonna
Should
come
we?
back.
Should we?
I'm gonna come back and, I asked, I left it up to Rudy to determine which video clips.
That's fine.
Because I think it's important. First of all, I think there's several things here, and it's not gonna happen all at once. But you've got to have protocols, and you got to have procedures, and you've got to have parameters on everything. And one of the things I'm gonna ask is the report on the first clip. Rudy, I might ask you, I presume that was one of your staff members giving the report?
Director of
And
curriculum.
what was the purpose of the report? Was it to determine whether or not you're gonna have summer school this summer? Or was it a progress report on what you've had in the past?
So the board requested an update on summer school programs.
Okay.
And so we're providing an update of what we did for the summer school and then what we will be doing, which was a continuation of what we did last year.
What, and again, I didn't see this before I let you pick it, but I'm just gonna jump in on several things, and then I'll talk about behaviors. But I think protocols will define behavior, including the behavior you're talking about right now. I think the comment about a strategic plan, which Rudy brought up and was addressed by several others, is critical, and I share that with you. I think every organization really needs to give priority to having in place a current strategic plan that's going to establish the framework and structure for their priorities. And I don't know where you are in your strategic plan, but hopefully you're moving towards it. I think the board has to be careful in making budgetary decisions piecemeal. And you almost got into a dialogue on funding summer school, expanding summer school and all the rest. I think some of the questions that were raised were appropriate. That's a plus. Jose, you raised some questions. Steve, you raised some questions. Questions appropriate to the report. You about the statistics, I think on none of you speaking Latino kids into the schools, whether or not research was referenced in what studies showed in the past. Those were positive. I think if you observe them though, both, I think the intensity with which they were presented, and this is not a criticism, Steve.
No, it is a criticism
No,
because I
okay,
deserve
yeah,
that
but-
criticism.
Or me.
Or for Jose.
Yeah.
Jose raised it as a question. When you raised it, it was almost like you were attacking. Did you know this? Did you study it? Make sure. And then I think the thing, and it's a negative where you came back, I will be inquiring of staff, in that you not only said, I expect you to do it, but I'm going to check on you and make sure you did it, which is a little threatening. And again, I'm not being negative. I'm just saying, as you observe it after the fact, again, teamwork. Now, very candidly, and again, protocols, some boards and superintendents agree that you go directly to the staff and report, ask questions of staff. Some prefer that it goes through the superintendent. But really, Rudy's the only one that you're going to hold accountable as to whether or not the staff followed up on what the board may have requested. It wasn't a board request, it was an individual request, which is another negative I brought up, in that you could ask for individual information, as you both did, which is appropriate, but then it should come back to the board to decide whether or not you're going to expand it for non-English speaking students, whether or not there's significance to looking at what research says and all the rest. Now, I think there is, so don't think I'm poo-pooing any of this, but that has to come back to the board, and the board has to say, as a follow-up to this discussion, Rudy, we expect boom, 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 boom. And then you've got to hold Rudy responsible and accountable for that. Not say you're going to go directly and follow up with the staff.
I understand that. One of the issues of why this was brought up many months before near the beginning of the school year, right? This was in February.
Oh, wait,
Was,
wait. February is not the beginning of the school year.
I know.
Oh, you're saying like in
To
September,
put
we brought
that,
it up.
right.
Yeah.
Because one of the issue is like A-Learn is expanding. That means spending more money. That means we're going to vote on that.
At this meeting?
That's what Kathy said, is that we're planning on expanding A-Learn.
Yeah, but A-Learn, and again, I'm looking at.
Okay,
protocols and
one
policy
of the
matters.
issues is if the district leadership doesn't do things in a timely manner, then things get delayed years and years and years. And actually, some of these kids don't have years and years and years to make up the math that they're not prepared for, and they're tested in 3rd grade. So the issue of the school district isn't going to stop working because there's no strategic plan.
No.
Summer school isn't going to stop working because we don't have a strategic plan that addresses how we do summer school.
Right.
I have a problem, particularly with the two of the last board presidents. Okay? And how they interact with the superintendent. So board leadership to me means board leadership.
Okay, that's a.
And
that's a
I
separate issue.
understand.
Okay,
In this issue, the fact that it's taken till February, when it was brought up in September, October, and agreed to be put on the agenda by a majority of the
November.
board? November?
That
Okay.
late, huh? It's still
Right.
a long time ago.
Okay.
It was actually brought up by Trustee Coronado in
Good.
November. They went on break, we had one meeting in December, and then it was put on the agenda for February. But
Right.
it was November, it was the last meeting in November by Trustee Coronado. He brought up a lot of topics that he wanted to discuss.
Is that okay, by the way, for board members to bring up topics?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I want to
Then
make a
received a
comment.
majority vote, by the way. So he said-
Oh, yeah.
he said received-
Right.
Oh, yeah.
You know, there's a lot of different issues on here. And let me go back to, apparently there's an issue, an underlying issue of Steve, you and leadership of Ellen and Bill in the past. We'll hold that off a little later because that's past and really I want to look to the future.
Right.
Okay. A 3-month delay for a report is not really a significant delay unless, and this is a question that I can't answer, unless you're willing to put a number of different reports on a board at the same time. One board, I mean, I don't know what your board agendas were like between November. You had a meeting in December, January, and February. It was not a February meeting, I take it, right?
Yeah, November, December, they went till 11 o'clock at night.
Yes.
Actually, one of the
Whoa,
issues is
too noisy.
this report on what happened in summer school oftentimes doesn't get done until just before the next summer school happens. So the question was, we did a summer school. What happened 6 months ago in the summer school? So there's an issue of should you wait 6 months before you write a report on what happened in your summer school?
Well, I want to go back.
So I was trying to get the report
Yeah.
earlier.
Let's,
But I don't know what.
I want it there as soon as we
yeah,
can get.
let's look at reports. Again, good operation, probably at the time that you lay out your plan for the year, which would be your annual summer retreat where you establish goals and all that. I think it's an appropriate time to identify reports that the board feels would be helpful for them to run the district, and you develop a calendar for them so that they're spread out throughout the year.
Yeah.
And you may decide on a report in August then that you may not get until the following June. But the purpose of the reports should be to inform the board, at least on this report, as I'm understanding it, maybe I'm wrong, on budget matters. And I think the board makes a mistake if they rule on budget at every meeting, getting the report at every meeting, but all of that should be in one discussion so that you have limited resources.
Oh, yeah.
And then you can distribute them where it makes the biggest bang for the buck.
I think Jose and I both understood that because one of the things we were focusing on is what the metrics for the kids were in their learning.
I'm the one that brought up spending more on it.
Right. And it was brought up that by Kathy that they were planning to spend more money. In other words, she was giving us an insight in what the budget would be for this learning issue. I don't think we were making the decision then exactly how much we were going to spend, but I considered it an opportunity. The superintendent has done a good job. We've started to do more this time than previous boards about giving direction to the staff. And the whole cycle of this is giving direction to the staff. Not to say we're going to double the budget for summer school, but we want to increase it from 10% maybe to 15% or 20% or whatever the number that the board wants to give direction for. And then what that number is and how they do it, they go back and do the policy that we want to have done.
So Bill, I think your question more is when we do this, when we look at roadblocks, I think this is an example possibly of a roadblock.
Right.
You have a different perspective on how the interactions were between members of the board of trustees and our executive staff. And when we have that perspective and it comes into clash like that, and the public's aware of it and the board may not be aware, once we figure where we're at that time as a roadblock, at that point, how do we react? What can we do to learn from that moment? How did the presenter feel when she, in this case, was listening to both sets of questions? And what can we do as board members to better improve our interaction with the phrasing of our questions given to either the presenter herself or to the superintendent or the other members of the board? And I think that's your whole point to this.
But, and my point's going to go one step further. How much of this report had to be given verbally, and how much could have been in a written report that would not have required, I think you said the meeting in December went until midnight or something?
Well, I mean, midnight was rare, but we had a lot of 10:30 and 11 o'clock meetings,
Right.
and it was tiring us all out.
Right.
But I'd like to respond to this point you just made when you're done.
Right. So, sometimes there are reports that can be given, and the questions can be solicited by a quick email to the superintendent. As a follow-up, can you get this additional information and get it for you without having to take a lot of time? Now, the advantage of reports at board meetings, the only advantage of reports at board meetings are PR value. And if it's not going to enhance the district's PR because of
Is what?
PR value.
PR value for reports at board meetings.
I thought this was
Verbal.
a discussion. My part,
Oh,
I'm unclear what this thing was because I thought it was a report on the summer school and a discussion of where we wanted to go going forward from the board's
Well,
perspective.
there's a deliberative component that
okay, if there's a deliberative
that
component.
whether
then
PR or
that's what I'm
not,
saying.
we got to
Okay.
find a meeting of the minds.
Okay, right. If it's a deliberative, if it's something that the board wanted to deliberate, then it should have been put on as and again, I don't know what it was. If it was just a report,
Just discussion.
was it a report or was it on the discussion agenda?
We don't have a distinction between those two things.
Yeah.
We don't.
We have
Okay.
discussion, which has reports, and then we have action, which has reports. And
And again, you
Action.
might want to take a look at your agenda and clarify discussion, which generally will move toward action, and consent. I think the board, and then just reports. And
so you can have an agenda that has an item that is a report submitted by staff to the board
it's broken into categories.
where no presentation is necessarily given, but everyone was expected to read the report and can ask questions for PR value or whatever in the meeting.
If they wanted to, you're right.
Actually,
Because every time there's a
Yeah.
report, it's basically, in my view, and except for maybe occasional consent item, if there's a staff report, the whole thing's, if it's given to the board, on the agenda, the whole thing's presented on the screen. There's almost never we wrote a 20-page report and I'll summarize it in, 30 seconds, but you guys read it. It's like, and I think I even heard before, I don't know if it was our current superintendent or prior superintendents, people worked a long time on this report, so here's the 20-minute presentation version. And it was done partially to respect staff time invested. But what I'm hearing from you is that maybe that's a little bit misguided, that like the staff time invested can be 100% appreciated and respected by our individual reading of it, but not the public performance of it.
And I'll go one step further. If you got a contentious board, your staff member would significantly appreciate the fact that there's not a public presentation.
Yeah, and there's an interesting
I'm being
thing.
very blunt.
No. And there's an interesting thing too, is
I'm being
this
very blunt.
particular staff member that was giving the report, I could, if I knew that one was going to be there, I could have specific little instances where there's been other reports that she's done and improved the kind of reporting for academic stuff that comes into this, comes into the public. Whatever happens between principals and teachers, we never know. What does come is sort of the PR, what's presented at the board level. And she has, by the way, given reports fairly dense text where she says, are there any questions? She comes up and says, okay, it was in their thing. That was my report. Do you guys have any questions? She doesn't have any PowerPoint.
That's
And
fine.
she's done a good job of that. So part of the thing, you may just see this in the one context. And I am harsh on people.
Wait,
I'd like to follow up
And-
on that point.
yeah,
And
but see that,
and the other thing is I try to make sure that when staff is up their game from last year to this year, this particular staff person, I've tried to make it a point that I really appreciate that these are easier to understand graphics and of the metrics of what it was than it was last year. And so
one of the
it
comments-
the difference is there are people on boards, seems to happen more in school boards, who are willing to say everybody is wonderful and everybody is doing a wonderful job on everything that they ever do for us.
This is a veiled personal attack.
Yeah,
These may
but
be
let me,
right now.
yeah, but let me,
No,
yeah, but let me.
no,
let me-
I- and
We
I
need to
tend
get
not-
back on track. We need to
I
get
wanna-
back on
I just-
track.
I just,
Thank
can
you,
I-
Jose.
yeah, Can I just?
Actually, I think Jose's right.
Right, let me, yeah, let me, I think we are getting off track. Let me real quickly go over some of the things that I observed, and again, I did not see the whole thing. My observation, number one, was I didn't hear anybody thank the staff member for giving the report. I didn't know if that's protocol or not, but generally speaking, the chair or somebody thanked the staff for the report and then open it for questions, et cetera. I think the dialogue seemed to be appropriate, but I think, and Steve, you yourself used the word, and I think that got to be careful as to the role of the board in being harsh. I'm a firm believer that you praise in public and criticize in private.
I can't,
Hey.
I got
hey, Steve,
censured for
Steve.
criticizing
Steve.
staff members in private.
No,
That's because you cursed and yelled.
No, I didn't.
But he's in the middle of giving his
no,
feedback. Please let him finish.
I'm giving some third-party observation.
Okay.
We can-
So I'm a firm believer. You praise in public, criticize in private. Now, I want to come back to say there's only one person you criticize as a board, and that's the superintendent. If his staff isn't doing a good job, you let him know. You don't criticize the staff members. The staff members, as far as you're concerned, are not your responsibility. Once you get beyond the superintendent, there's only one person that's responsible for everybody else. It's the superintendent. And if he or she isn't doing his or her job, then as a board, you've got the responsibility to get a different superintendent. I mean, it's that simple. Now, let's look at the various roles. That's the superintendent's role. If his staff is not giving you, if he works through his staff, if you aren't getting the information you need to make appropriate decisions for the district, he's the person you go after, not the staff members. If he doesn't have the adequate staff, his responsibility is to come and say, Bill Attia doesn't know what he's doing. I've got to get somebody to replace Bill Attia because I can't give you what you need because Bill Attia isn't competent to give it to you. Now, again, but that's his role working with you, not your role to evaluate his or her subordinates. That's one thing. So now I want to go to the role of the chair, and I'm not disagreeing with you, and I didn't see enough of it, but I think the role of the chair is to provide a overview of a discussion or a topic before the board, before it's discussed. Now, if you feel that she or he are superimposing, and again, I haven't looked at your board clip, so I can't say. They may be inappropriate. But what I'm sharing again is the role of the chair. The role of the chair is primarily one thing, and that is to direct the operations of the board. You mentioned earlier, and so I'm just coming to the points that were brought up. It's not the chair's responsibility to direct the superintendent. That is not the chair's responsibility. It's the 5 of you that give the superintendent direction at your board meeting. The majority vote directs him. Now, if he has something that comes up between meetings that he needs clarity on, yes, he can go to the chair. But the chair's role is to coordinate the board and to make sure the board is behaving in a manner and operating in a manner that is efficient and effective. And one of the things the chair needs to do is to summarize the situation. The chair is always the last one to vote on an issue, but it is the chair's responsibility to summarize as he or she sees it, what the issue is. Now, if that's what they were doing and you criticize, Steve, I would have to take exception. And I don't want you to jump in at this point. If they did something else, then you might have a, now, whether you have parliamentary procedure or anything, that generally is considered to be the role of the chair. Now, unfortunately, in a lot of districts, the chair has been delegated the responsibilities to pretty much oversee the operations of the superintendent. I think that's a mistake. I think that's the board's role. All 5 of you, you get his reports. And one of the things I think you may want to consider, concept of team. Now, I was just at one meeting that time I was invited in. Do you sit at a separate table regularly, or do you sit at the board table?
The superintendent used to sit closer to the board, and it was more of a visual team.
Is there
Yeah,
any reason why that was changed?
and it's very interesting.
Table's only so big.
Well, there's a very interesting thing too, is
Hold on.
I didn't hear you say.
So when Kevin Skelly came on, and we all respected him a lot, and I still do,
He took it out.
he, bringing in his own experience, he made recommendations about placement of chairs, and we've kept that placement. And as a matter of fact, we used to have, 2 tables coming out from this one, the board table, and the district staff would sit at those tables. We've changed that, and now we've got just a long set of tables where the district staff is over here, so they're away from the board. Used to be the board president and the superintendent sat next to each other so they could help, manage the meeting as it was going along. Now it's just the board with the president in the middle. The superintendent is over at the side. I think the way the camera is set up, usually you can't see the superintendent, you can see the board, and I understand the rationale for that. We haven't discussed it.
And we're
What
not-
is
Well,
the rationale for
let-
that?
let me-
I don't understand it.
let me make a comment on what was earlier happening. We basically are set up the same way the Palo Alto School District board is set up, right? Their staff is to the side. The city council is in Mountain View, is set up with the council. And I think they have the mayor in the middle, who's the chair. One of the issue of PR gets to be when the board president and the superintendent sit next to each other and there's whispering between the two, there's a question, is the board president acting as the neutral arbitrator between board members? Is this a board meeting, or is this the superintendent's meeting? I have an issue of governance with how the previous decade this board was governed. So the issue of, are we, I'm not going to use the term because Ellen doesn't like it a lot, but
It's kind of you.
do we just do what the superintendent tells us? And here's the update from the public policy that the CSBA do, and we spend most of our time doing that, or we discuss issues like summer school and Latino achievement and issues having to do with kids. So
Steve, you live in the past a lot of the time. don't you?
I like, well, I want to
I
say,
don't think
I'm
there's-
for
there's
this,
not- there's
the
not right or wrong way.
PR of how the board looks of the videos that we do does matter. I would like it if the superintendent was included and the person who comes up and is addressing the board is included, but I don't think it's a big issue, but I think it is a big issue that our president be in the center of us.
That's good or bad?
I think it's good. It's not the president and the superintendent are running things.
Greg, you had a comment? And then
I forget what it was.
Jose, okay, Jose.
So I think we're, again, I don't know if we're at roadblock or if we're at protocol or if it's a
No,
combining of
we're-
both now. Or,
It's a
We're the
protocol.
discussion of the video.
okay.
yeah.
All right.
And-
Are we keeping to our 11:30 time slot?
Maybe not.
Oh,
I
okay.
think we're meeting until Monday, through Monday.
Yeah, we will. We
Sleeping
okay.
bags.
I was thinking of 12 o'clock, but you're right. We are 11:30.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay, let me just say,
Positive
I'm going to
and
say about three
negative.
things real quickly. And and I'll summarize these in my written report. Number one, I think if there's an arrangement you can make to show the public that it is a team between the superintendent and the board, I think it's to your advantage. I think in your behavior, it should clarify that there are two different distinctions. But more often than not, the superintendent sits with the board at the board table because he is your CEO. You hire him and pay him to provide you guidance. He does make recommendations, I hope, on every item before you. And so he should be engaged in the dialogue of the board on every recommendation you vote on. And he should be part of that, even though he is not the voter on that. So I'm just sharing with you my opinion. The other staff members, I think, are optional where you seat them, but I do think he is your CEO, and in that relation, he has a special relationship. Other thing, I'm not going to comment on all of these things, but well, I talked about the budget. I think that you have to clarify items on your agenda, if they're reports for discussion or if they are reports for the sake of reports. Because you can spend a lot of time discussing reports that should be just informational. And if that's what they are, then I really don't think they should take up a lot of your time.
they could be put on the consent
Yeah,
agenda,
could that-
right?
You just put on the
Or it could
consent.
just be a separate part on the agenda, because technically, they don't even have to be on the consent agenda. The consent agenda is you take an action.
No,
And if you want to say you just received the
Right.
report, that's fine. But there's no action taken on reports as of themselves. If the report is based on something you're taking action on, then it should be part of the discussion agenda and action agenda. So I'm just clarifying. The discussion on board evaluation, I don't think, you do yourself by, make sure he has a big gavel. What you need to show on television is not your frustration internally with each other as board members, but your concern for what's happening to kids. And very little of the video I saw today, some of the questions about what's happening to the kids in summer school, have you looked at research? But beyond that, there wasn't a whole lot related to kids. I think there needs to be a way, Ellen, that all the board members feel comfortable that on every topic, you will go around and give everyone a chance to speak. Steve has felt that he is left out. No.
Okay.
On the other hand, when you look at it, you do take most of the time. Now, but it would be better for him to have the time as part of a process, because it's not fair to make him feel that he has to jump in. And maybe he doesn't have to, but he does have that feeling. And I'm not being critical, but. I
See the
think-
big timer we have
I would like to add something.
that we don't use?
Give everyone a chance to talk. And I try to go around mutually. Sometimes it's by hands. So Stephen always gets a chance to talk if he raises his hand or if we are in, down the road kind of thing. And he interjects himself into a lot of other comments. So for Stephen to say, or for you to say, this may be what you're observing, that he's not getting enough
Oh,
time to
no,
talk.
I didn't say he's not
He
getting
said he
enough time.
thinks he doesn't get a chance.
No, I said
think it
he
is
has more
true.
time.
I think it is true that Stephen thinks he doesn't get
His fair share.
his fair share to talk. And I think if you look at all of our videos, including this one, you see that Stephen interjects himself frequently and spends many more seconds and minutes talking than everyone. And I give him and everybody else chances to talk. So, I just needed to say that.
Right, no, and I think that's observable. And I think Stephen himself realizes that.
And I
But that-
really wish
no,
we
no,
have
no,
a timer that the board president would use.
I hate timers.
But no, I think you're, I think you're.
Right.
Let's
you-
have Bill continue.
Let's, parliamentary procedure, whether or not you have parliamentary procedure is insignificant. I think the fact that you should have a process and Robert's rules are pretty well accepted. And you might want to take a look at that. So I'll summarize some of these other comments in the report I give you because I do want to get to the other important things that are very important.
Before we go on to your next section, we are going to go back to personnel report at the end of the meeting before we adjourn.
All right.
Okay, there's something.
Are we on number 5, the roadblocks?
Okay, we're gonna go on to number 5. What I'd like you to do is take the blue cards. I want you to reflect on your board meetings of the past year. On each blue card, use a separate, I want you to list a roadblock that you personally feel detracts from your ability to serve the kids in this district as well as you feel you'd like to. It can be anything at all. It can be things we talked about today. But what distracts this board from being the best board you could be? And there's more blue cards. In fact, we got about 100 of them. And I'd like you to put one on each. If you need more blue cards, we got lots of white cards, put a B on the top of it. But please be specific in what you feel can make this an issue that you feel needs to be resolved to make this board a better board. That might be the best way to word it. Anything you feel that needs to be addressed to make this board a better board.
Do we pass these to you?
Here, just collect them all and take them with me.
Would you like us to sign off on them?
No.
Okay.
I don't want any
With
names.
blood.
I don't want any
Fingerprints.
names. I just want your candid opinion of what the board needs to address, the board, the 5 needs to address to make this board a more effective board.
Thank you.
Better ways. Thank you. And I'm going to interject right now because time is running out. The yellow cards are protocols that you would recommend this board develop or use to improve its performance as a board. For example, the suggestion that you follow Robert's rules. The way people behave towards each other. Protocols. So, and let me just say this. We'll give about 3 more minutes. And I'm going to stay as long as you need to finish up those blue and yellow cards to take them. But there are other things that I want to share with you. I've got samples of board protocols and roadblocks that were developed by other boards. I was going to share, but maybe we don't get time to share it today. Thank you. Here you go, sir. If I could just interrupt and then we'll go back to this thing. Does anybody have to leave promptly at 11:30? You know, about 10 minutes beyond.
I would.
You have to leave promptly. 11:30.
Yes.
Okay. Real quickly, I just passed out examples of self-evaluation, board self-evaluation. Two different approaches. I mentioned them earlier. One has really both in them to a degree. The checklist, the board team, board members edit information on important issues. Each board member can do strength, weakness, unsure, with comments at the end, much as we said earlier. The second one is really totally open-ended. This is a combination of checklists. The second one I gave you is totally open-ended. Some board members, some boards like to combine the both and have some open-ended questions as well as checklist questions. I leave it to your preference as to what you would like me to design, utilizing your roadblocks. And what I'd like to do, quickly move you to item 7 real quickly. I would like to get from work with your permission with Ellen and Rudy to find out what you perceive to be your primary responsibilities as a board, what your goals are, and your goals are stated in your agenda today. Do you have an ethics statement for this board?
No.
Have you ever passed a statement of ethics or behavior?
Yeah.
And
We
policy?
have a board bylaw
Yeah.
about,
Protocol or something?
yeah.
I would like to
We
use
can send
Board
that to you
norms?
if you. If
Is
you'd like.
board norms?
Yeah.
There's
Board
something
norms.
here
Board
that I
norms.
don't know what status
Okay.
it has. It gets printed up, it gets distributed. It has Jose's name on
What,
it.
what I'd like, with your permission, is to gather these things along with your roadblocks and protocols and develop a self-evaluation instrument for your review. Is that agreeable to everyone? It'd be a draft. Is there anything else you would like to have included in your self-evaluation instrument? Hearing nothing, I think I'll go. Then the last thing I gave you is if you could just take about 2 minutes to evaluate today's workshop on this sheet. I really would like your feedback to help for future meetings and more importantly, to help other boards that I may have to work with. And with that, I think we made the 9:30. I'm going to be here. You all don't have to run out, but Jose does, and we made a commitment that we'd be out here by 11:30.
Okay, so where's your? Here we go. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Should we use your name in this evaluation? No, okay.
Where is that? Evaluation?
Should have got
It's over-
three
it's over
things.
Right there.
Oh, okay.
Oh, those
top
one
left, yeah.
page? Okay.
Thank you very much. Let me share with you, when you get the draft, there's no pride of ownership in what I do. So any suggestions you may have, please get back. And I will like to incorporate those suggestions in a draft if I might be able to. Rudy, anything that you have?
Bill, can you think of a productive approach to like after a meeting to get little snippets
You know,
to kind of share from the video? Like if a board member thought, man, we did a bad job at that, it'd be better. What we currently do, I don't think we watch the video. I don't have time
Right.
to like sit in a 4-hour meeting and then watch a 4-hour video of the 4-hour meeting. So
You
I don't
know,
look at a lot of them.
we talked last time, some boards have a self-assessment right after their meeting that each board member fills out.
Like agendized for item 11 or whatever.
Well, it's when, after they adjourn, they fill out the form and give
After
it to
the
me.
adjourn, not
Right.
part of the meeting.
No, not part of the meeting. As they adjourn, they evaluate that meeting. Superintendent gets some forms and summarizes them and sends it to the board in their following, I don't know, do you send emails or?
So you get a form? The idea is you get a form and you give it to the superintendent, and the superintendent acts
just
as a
like what we're doing here.
conglomerator.
Right.
Just like
Oh,
we're doing
okay.
here. We're
Right.
gonna say, like focus on kids. It'd be like focus on kids, civil behavior.
Did we
stuff
do
like
that this meeting? Oh, yeah, that's
Protocols.
Yeah,
And-
okay,
And highlights of positive highlights, negative highlights.
right,
I think the negative highlights is what's bothering you as a board.
right.
And I think it would be helpful to identify it because.
Some
I think
positive highlights though too.
Yeah.
We do
positive and
have-
negative,
Okay,
right.
but your point is,
I think that's important for you to reflect. I mean, I think that there are some spontaneous outbreaks that detract from the board meeting that you might after the fact. Now, our personalities and all that, but I think that being aware of it immediately after the meeting might help you as you go to the next meeting.
could I Should I get board, see if the board agrees with having a thing after the meeting? Because I'd like to work with you on it to have something like that.
Mr. Teal, with all due respect, thank you so much for your help. I need to rush out, but I appreciate your help and your time and your energy and your patience. Thank you
And
again.
I told Jose.
And
all
thank
we
you
need
for
the
putting-
Personnel report is a quorum, so.
See you, Teal.
Okay.
And
by
thank
the
you
way,
for
I-
putting this thing on
By the
the
way, thank
agenda,
you.
be willing to come on a Saturday.
Yeah. Thank
We
you to
saw
the
it right
board.
there.
Thank
We
you
saw
to
it.
the board
And it
members
happened.
and Rudy and Bill for spending your time on this.
I'd be happy to help you work on it if you'd like. I could send you a sample. We developed one with the board that uses it at every meeting. I could send you a couple samples that I know.
Okay. I mean, this sounds like,
Would you find that helpful?
I personally don't feel will be very productive.
that's because you don't believe that any amount of feedback or self-assessment can change some problems we have. That,
I
that one,
don't think it's very productive.
just
I
repeat the
don't
same thing.
necessarily agree.
So I'd like to, I think it could help. I think we need,
Why don't you
We
work
have
with the
improvement to do.
superintendent? You can work on that on one-on-one with the superintendent, right?
but he's the one with the form. So anyways, I'll work.
Oh,
with
he's
Bill
going
and
to
the
send
superintendent.
us the forms, right?
I think it would be useful for you to send us some sample forms, and I'd be willing to try to do these. I don't know if it would make a difference, but I think the exercise would be worthwhile, especially if it's not done during the meeting.
Right afterwards.
Your neighboring district does something like that after every meeting.
Oh, yeah?
Which one? Palo Alto?
Oh, I'll tell you.
How many years have you worked with them?
I worked with them for about 13 years. And then,
Okay,
and then
I didn't know that.
then they went with another board, another gentleman for 2 or 3 years, and then they asked me to come back.
I think you might have told me that, but I forgot. Somehow, so it wasn't continuous. like you said.
You got a personnel report?
Yes. So he's going to put it up on the
Oh, yeah.
trustees. He's going to put it up on the screen, the personnel report.
This is not closed session.
It is, no, not tonight.
This is
No.
the consent
Personnel
agenda.
report, yeah, personnel report is normally public. So for the purposes of the agenda, we are going back to item 2A, the personnel report. There is a personnel report that we're being shown on the video screen that was part of an attachment to this meeting. And most of it is temporary teachers being moved to probationary status with one resignation.
Could you zoom in one more time, Dr. Rudolph, because the right 5 columns aren't as useful as the 8 left columns? Other direction. There we go. That's the important stuff. Change of status from temporary teacher to probationary 1. These are teachers that have done 1 year and they're going to come and do a 2nd year, correct? Or these are teachers becoming tenured?
No, they're not. These are temporary teachers who become probationary.
Which means their 2nd year with us. Okay. I'm ready for it to go on with it.
And then there's, on this page, there's a leave for absence, and then the addition was the resignation as well. So you approved this report earlier, and then there was one addition to it.
So can I have a motion to approve the personnel report?
I move to approve the personnel report.
Thank you.
My second.
Okay, it's been moved by trustee Coladonado, seconded by trustee Lambert, that we approve the personnel report. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Nay. Motion passes 4-0. And I noted that trustee Gutierrez left the meeting at 11:30, which is the scheduled ending time. And that with 4 trustees, this was a quorum. Are we ready to adjourn the meeting? Okay, I'm going to adjourn the meeting at 11:40.